Sarah Chen woke up at 5:47 a.m., just like she had every morning for the past 3 years. Her internal clock was more reliable than any alarm, a leftover habit from her military days that she couldn't shake even though her life now revolved around cartoon schedules and nap time routines instead of mission briefings and combat drills. The small apartment was quiet except for the soft breathing coming from the race car bed in the corner where her 4-year-old son Tommy slept peacefully. She moved through her morning routine with the same precision she once used to check her equipment before deployment. Coffee first, black and strong, while she reviewed her mental checklist for the day. Tommy's lunch needed to be packed, his backpack checked for the permission slip she'd signed the night before, and his favorite stuffed elephant needed to be located before the inevitable meltdown when he couldn't find it. Sarah caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror as she brushed her teeth. The woman staring back at her looked like any other suburban mom approaching 30. Her black hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she wore the standard uniform of parenthood yoga pants and an oversized sweater. Nothing about her appearance suggested that she could field strip an assault rifle in under 30 seconds or that she had once led rescue missions in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. 3 years ago, she had been Petty Officer First Class Sarah Chen, one of only a handful of women to successfully complete the grueling training to become a Navy SEAL. She had served 2 tours overseas, earned commendations for valor, and was respected by her male colleagues who had initially doubted whether a woman could handle the physical and mental demands of special operations. But that life felt like it belonged to someone else now. The woman who had rappelled from helicopters and navigated hostile territories was gone, replaced by someone who worried about whether Tommy was eating enough vegetables and if his cough needed a doctor's attention. She had chosen this life deliberately, trading her military career for motherhood when she discovered she was pregnant during her second deployment. Tommy stirred in his bed, making the soft mumbling sounds that meant he was starting to wake up. Sarah smiled despite her fatigue. He was her world now, the reason she got up every morning and the reason she had walked away from everything she had trained for. His father, a fellow SEAL she had met during training, had been killed in action before Tommy was born. She had never told her son the details of how his father died, only that he had been a hero who loved them both very much. The transition from military life to civilian single motherhood had been harder than any mission she had ever undertaken. The structure and purpose that had defined her existence were replaced by the beautiful chaos of raising a child alone. There were days when she missed the adrenaline, the sense of purpose, the brotherhood of her unit. But watching Tommy discover the world with wonder and trust made every sacrifice worthwhile. She had moved to this quiet neighborhood specifically because it was safe. The crime rate was low, the schools were good, and her neighbors were the kind of people who brought casseroles when someone was sick and organized block parties in the summer. It was the polar opposite of the dangerous environments she had once called home, and that was exactly what she wanted for Tommy. Sarah had never told anyone in her new life about her military background. To the other parents at Tommy's preschool, she was just Sarah, the single mom who worked part-time at the local library and volunteered for every school event. Her supervisor at the library knew she was a veteran but not the specifics of her service. Sarah preferred it that way. She wanted to be known for who she was now, not who she used to be. Tommy finally opened his eyes, blinking in the morning light filtering through his dinosaur curtains. "Mommy," he called softly, and Sarah felt her heart melt the way it did every time he said her name. She went over to his bed and scooped him up, breathing in the sweet smell of his hair. "Good morning, my little man," she whispered, carrying him to the kitchen. "Are you ready for another adventure today?" Their morning routine was sacred to both of them. Tommy would sit at the small kitchen table while Sarah made breakfast, usually scrambled eggs or oatmeal with fruit. He would chatter about his dreams or ask endless questions about everything from why the sky was blue to whether dinosaurs liked pizza. Sarah treasured these conversations, knowing that this phase of constant curiosity wouldn't last forever. Today Tommy was particularly excited because his class was taking a field trip to the fire station. He had been talking about it for weeks, practicing what he would say to the firefighters and wondering if they would let him see inside the fire truck. Sarah had signed all the permission forms and packed extra snacks in his lunchbox. "Will the firemen be wearing their big helmets?" Tommy asked, swinging his legs from his booster seat. "Probably," Sarah said, spreading peanut butter on his toast. "And they might even let you try one on if you ask nicely." "I'm gonna ask really, really nicely," Tommy declared with the serious expression he wore when discussing important matters. Sarah looked at her watch. They had plenty of time before she needed to drop him off at preschool, but she liked to stick to their schedule. Routine was important for Tommy, and it helped her feel like she had some control over their lives. She had learned in the military that preparation and consistency were key to success in any mission, even if that mission was just getting a 4-year-old ready for school. After breakfast, she helped Tommy get dressed in his favorite shirt with the cartoon fire truck on it, appropriate for the day's adventure. He insisted on brushing his own teeth, though she had to help him reach the spots he missed. These small moments of independence were important to encourage, even when it would be faster and easier to do everything herself. As they were getting ready to leave, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her neighbor Mrs. Rodriguez asking if she could pick up Tommy from school that afternoon. Sarah had agreed to help the elderly woman with some heavy grocery bags the week before, and Mrs. Rodriguez had been looking for ways to return the favor ever since. Sarah quickly typed back that she would be picking Tommy up herself but thanked her for the offer. The neighborhood was just beginning to wake up as they stepped outside. Mr. Peterson was retrieving his newspaper from the driveway across the street, and the young couple next door was loading their baby into their car for what was probably a doctor's appointment. Sarah waved to Mrs. Rodriguez, who was already tending to her flower garden despite the early hour. This was the life she had chosen, and she was grateful for it every day. The quiet predictability, the safety, the chance to watch her son grow up without the constant threat of deployment or danger. She had given up the excitement and purpose of her military career, but she had gained something even more precious. Tommy chatted happily in his car seat as they drove to preschool, pointing out every fire truck, police car, and ambulance they passed. Sarah found herself smiling at his enthusiasm, remembering when she used to feel that same excitement about her work. The difference was that Tommy's enthusiasm was pure and innocent, while hers had been tempered by the reality of what those vehicles often responded to. She pulled up to the cheerful building that housed Sunshine Preschool, with its colorful playground and hand-painted sign. Tommy was already unbuckling himself, eager to tell his friends about the upcoming field trip. Sarah walked into his classroom, kissed him goodbye, and watched through the window as he ran to join a group of children who were building something elaborate with blocks. The drive back home was quiet without Tommy's constant chatter. Sarah used this time to mentally plan her day. She had a shift at the library that afternoon, but first she wanted to clean the apartment and maybe start reading the new thriller novel she had picked up. It was going to be a perfectly ordinary day, just the way she liked it. As she turned onto her street, Sarah noticed a van parked across from her apartment building that hadn't been there when she left. It wasn't unusual for people to park on the street, but something about it caught her attention. Maybe it was the way it was positioned to have a clear view of her building's entrance, or maybe it was just instinct from her years of training to notice things that were out of place. She parked in her usual spot and gathered her purse and Tommy's forgotten lunchbox from the back seat. The van was still there, its windows tinted too dark to see inside. Sarah mentally shrugged it off. She was probably being paranoid, a side effect of her military training that sometimes made her see threats where none existed. But, as she walked toward her building, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She glanced back at the van once more before disappearing into the lobby, telling herself that she was just being silly. This was her safe neighborhood, her peaceful life. Nothing exciting or dangerous ever happened here. That belief was about to be shattered in ways she couldn't imagine, and the quiet suburban mom was about to discover that some skills, once learned, are never truly forgotten. The warrior she thought she had buried was still there, waiting just beneath the surface, ready to emerge when the people she loved most were threatened. But, for now, Sarah Chen climbed the stairs to her second-floor apartment, mentally planning her grocery list and wondering what she should make for dinner, completely unaware that danger was already much closer than she realized. Sarah spent the morning in blissful domesticity, folding tiny clothes and organizing Tommy's ever-growing collection of toy cars. The apartment felt peaceful and secure, filled with the warm scent of the vanilla candle she had lit while cleaning. She had almost forgotten about the van she'd noticed earlier, dismissing it as her military-trained paranoia getting the better of her suburban reality. Around 11:30, she was sitting at her small kitchen table with a cup of tea and her laptop, researching summer camp options for Tommy. The local community center offered a program that included swimming lessons and nature walks, which sounded perfect for her active little boy. She was making notes about registration dates when she heard footsteps in the hallway outside her apartment. The footsteps stopped directly outside her door. Sarah paused, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman who lived across the hall, usually shuffled when she walked and used her walker. These footsteps were different, deliberate, measured, and there were at least two sets of them. She glanced at the clock. It was too early for mail delivery, and she wasn't expecting any packages. A soft knock came at the door. Not the confident rap of someone making a legitimate visit, but a tentative sound, as if the person knocking didn't want to be heard by other residents. Sarah closed her laptop quietly and moved toward the door. Her military training kicked in automatically, though she didn't consciously recognize it. She approached from the side, avoiding standing directly in front of the door where someone could see her shadow under the gap. Her hand moved instinctively to check the deadbolt, locked, just as she'd left it. "Miss Chen," a voice called softly through the door. "We're from the cable company. There's an issue with the lines in your building that's affecting several units." Something about the voice made Sarah's pulse quicken. It was too smooth, too practiced, and she hadn't called about any cable problems. More importantly, her building's cable service was managed by a different company than the one the man had mentioned. It was a small detail, but, in her former life, small details had often meant the difference between life and death. She moved to the window that faced the street and carefully parted the curtain just enough to see outside. The van was still there, but now she could see a second vehicle, a dark sedan parked closer to her building's entrance. Both vehicles had their engines running, evident from the exhaust visible in the cool morning air. Sarah's heart rate began to increase, her body responding to threat indicators her mind was still processing. She moved away from the window and pressed her back against the wall beside her front door, listening intently. She could hear at least two different voices whispering in the hallway, though she couldn't make out the words. The knock came again, more insistent this time. "Miss Chen? We really need to check your cable connection. It'll just take a few minutes." Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. Best case scenario, these were legitimate cable workers who had gotten their facts wrong about which company serviced her building. Worst case scenario, these were people who meant her harm and had specifically targeted her apartment. Given her background, her instinct was to prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. She moved quickly through her apartment, her movements efficient and silent. From the bedroom closet, she retrieved a lockbox hidden behind winter coats. Her fingers punched in the combination automatically, muscle memory from years of practice. Inside the lockbox was her service pistol, properly maintained and loaded, along with 2 spare magazines. She had hoped never to touch it again after leaving the Navy, but she had kept it as insurance, telling herself it was just a precaution. Now she was grateful for that paranoia. Sarah checked the weapon quickly and, professionally, ensuring it was ready for use while praying she wouldn't need it. She tucked it into the waistband of her yoga pants and pulled her sweater down to conceal it. Her movements were those of someone who had performed these actions thousands of times in training and real-world situations. The voices in the hallway were getting louder, and she heard what sounded like someone testing her door handle. The deadbolt held, but she knew that wouldn't stop anyone who was really determined to get in. She needed more information and she needed it quickly. Moving to her kitchen, Sarah grabbed her cell phone and quietly dialed 911. When the operator answered, she spoke in a whisper. "This is Sarah Chen at 1247, Maple Street, apartment 2B. There are people outside my door claiming to be cable workers, but I think they're trying to break in. Please send police immediately." "Ma'am, are you in immediate danger?" the operator asked. "I'm not sure yet, but something isn't right. They mentioned the wrong cable company and there are suspicious vehicles outside my building. Officers are being dispatched to your location. Stay on the line with me and try to find a safe place to wait." Sarah heard the sound of metal against metal. Someone was working on her lock. These weren't cable workers making a mistake. These were people who had come specifically for her, and they were prepared to break in whether she cooperated or not. Her mind shifted into tactical mode, a mental state she hadn't accessed in 3 years. The apartment layout flashed through her consciousness as she automatically identified cover positions, escape routes, and potential weapons. The bathroom had a small window that led to the fire escape, but it would be difficult to reach and would leave her exposed. The bedroom had no secondary exit but offered the most cover. The lock-picking sound stopped, replaced by hushed conversation. Sarah heard someone say "just kick it" and knew her time was running out. She moved quickly to the kitchen and turned off all the lights in the apartment, giving herself the advantage of darkness and familiarity with the space. "Ma'am? Ma'am, are you still there?" the 911 operator was saying. "Yes, they're trying to break down my door. How long until police arrive?"
ETA is 7 minutes. Can you get to a safe room? 7 minutes.
In tactical terms, that might as well be 7 hours. Sarah knew that whatever was about to happen would be over long before help arrived. She was on her own, just like she had been so many times before in hostile territory. The difference was that this time, there was no backup coming, no extraction team standing by, and no command center coordinating support. There was just her training, and the overwhelming knowledge that Tommy would be coming home to this apartment in a few hours, expecting his mother to be here safe and sound. The front door shuddered as someone kicked it. The frame held, but Sarah could see it wouldn't survive many more impacts. She moved to position herself behind the kitchen counter, which would provide cover and give her a clear line of sight to the front entrance. Another kick, and this time she heard wood splintering. Sarah drew her weapon and held it in a proper grip, her hand steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. Everything she had learned about close-quarters combat came flooding back as if she had never left the service. The third kick did it. The door burst open and 2 men entered her apartment quickly, moving with the coordination of people who had done this before. Both were wearing dark clothing and ski masks, and both were carrying firearms. They moved through her apartment like professionals, one covering the other as they searched room by room. Sarah remained perfectly still behind the kitchen counter, controlling her breathing and waiting for the right moment. She could hear them communicating in whispers as they checked the bedroom and bathroom. "She's not here," one of them said in a voice loud enough for her to hear clearly.
"Cars in the parking lot."
"She's here somewhere," the other replied. They regrouped in her living room, and Sarah could see them through the gap between the counter and the wall. They were both larger than her, clearly experienced, and definitely armed. In her military career, she had faced similar odds, but always as part of a team and always with extensive intelligence about her opponents. Now she was flying blind, outnumbered, and fighting to protect not just her own life but her future with her son. The thought of Tommy coming home to find her gone, or worse, was enough to steel her resolve completely. One of the intruders moved toward the kitchen area. Sarah knew she had seconds before she would be discovered. Her training told her that the element of surprise was her greatest advantage, and once it was gone, her chances of survival dropped significantly. She thought of Tommy's excited chatter about the fire station field trip, his sleepy smile when he woke up that morning, his complete trust that his mother would always be there to protect him. These men had made a serious mistake when they decided to threaten the life she had built with her son. The suburban mom who had been folding laundry and researching summer camps an hour ago was gone. In her place stood a Navy SEAL who had been trained to handle exactly this type of situation, and who had never lost anyone under her protection. The man rounded the corner toward the kitchen, his weapon drawn but not yet aimed. He was expecting to find a terrified civilian, not a trained warrior who had been waiting for exactly this moment. Sarah Chen was about to remind herself why she had earned the respect of some of the toughest soldiers in the world, and why the enemy had learned to fear her unit's reputation. The quiet life she had built was worth fighting for, and she was prepared to do whatever it took to preserve it. The next few minutes would determine whether Tommy would have a mother to come home to, or whether these men would succeed in whatever plan had brought them to her door. But they were about to discover that some people are much more dangerous than they appear, and that a mother protecting her child is the most formidable opponent of all. The moment the first intruder rounded the corner into her kitchen, Sarah's world shifted into the hyper-focused state that had kept her alive through countless dangerous missions. Time seemed to slow as her training took complete control, every movement calculated and precise. The man's eyes widened in shock as he found himself face to face with Sarah's weapon aimed directly at his center mass. He had expected to find a cowering civilian, not a woman in a perfect shooting stance with the steady hands and cold eyes of a professional soldier. "Drop your weapon," Sarah commanded in a voice that carried absolute authority. It was a tone she hadn't used in 3 years, but it came back as naturally as breathing. The intruder hesitated for a fraction of a second, his own weapon halfway raised. That hesitation cost him everything. Sarah had been trained that in close-quarters combat, the person who acted first almost always won. She had no intention of giving these men a chance to hurt her or threaten her ability to return to her son. The suppressed gunshot was barely louder than a loud clap. The first intruder dropped immediately, his weapon clattering across her kitchen floor. Sarah was already moving before he hit the ground, her body flowing into the tactical movements that had been drilled into her through years of training. "Marcus," the second man shouted from the living room. "Marcus, report." Sarah pressed her back against the refrigerator, using it as cover while she assessed the situation. One target down, one remaining. The second man would be more cautious now, aware that he was dealing with someone who could fight back effectively. She could hear him moving through her apartment, his footsteps heavier now as he abandoned stealth for speed. He was probably trying to find a position where he could see into the kitchen without exposing himself to return fire.
Sarah's apartment was small enough that there weren't many options.
"I know you're in there," the man called out, his voice trying to project confidence but betraying an edge of uncertainty. "My partner might be down, but I'm still armed and you're still outnumbered. Come out with your hands up and nobody else gets hurt."
Sarah almost smiled at the irony.
He was trying to negotiate from a position of weakness while pretending to have the upper hand. In hostage situations during her military career, she had heard similar bluffs from desperate enemies who were running out of options. She moved carefully along the kitchen wall toward the doorway that led to the living room. Her apartment's layout meant that he couldn't see her approach without exposing himself to her line of sight. The tactical advantage was shifting in her favor. Through the gap between the wall and the door frame, she caught a glimpse of the second intruder. He was positioned behind her couch, using it as cover while he tried to watch both the kitchen entrance and the front door. His weapon was trained on the kitchen doorway, but his position wasn't sustainable.
He couldn't stay there indefinitely.
Sarah's phone was still connected to the 911 operator, and she could hear the woman's voice calling her name from where she had dropped it on the kitchen counter.
Police sirens were audible in the distance, growing louder with each passing second.
The cavalry was coming, but she needed to survive the next few minutes. "Listen to me," Sarah called out, her voice steady and controlled.
"The police are already on their way. You can hear the sirens.
Your best option is to leave now while you still can."
"Not happening," the man replied.
"We came here for a reason, and we're not leaving empty-handed."
That confirmed what Sarah had suspected. This wasn't a random break-in.
These men had come specifically for her, which meant they knew something about her background.
The question was how much they knew and what they wanted.
"What reason?" she asked, using conversation to gather intelligence while she planned her next move.
"I'm nobody special.
Just a single mom trying to raise her kid." The man laughed, but there was no humor in it.
"Cut the act, Sarah. We know exactly who you are and what you've done. Did you really think you could just disappear and live happily ever after?" Sarah's blood ran cold.
Someone had tracked her down despite all the precautions she had taken to build a new identity after leaving the military. Her civilian life, her peaceful existence with Tommy, had all been an illusion. The past she thought she had left behind had finally caught up with her. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her mind was racing through possibilities.
Who could have found her? Who would want to?
"Kabul, 2019, the man said, and Sarah felt her stomach drop.
Operation Silent Thunder. Ring any bells? It did.
Operation Silent Thunder had been one of her final missions before she discovered she was pregnant and decided to leave the military. It had involved extracting a high-value target from a compound in Afghanistan, a mission that had gone perfectly according to plan until the very end. The target they had extracted was a Taliban commander who had been secretly providing intelligence to American forces. The operation had saved countless lives and disrupted a major terrorist network. But it had also made enemies of some very dangerous people who had long memories and longer reach than she had anticipated. "That was 3 years ago," Sarah said.
"Ancient history."
"Not to the people whose operation you destroyed," the intruder replied. "They've been looking for everyone involved in that mission. Your old teammates have been keeping a low profile overseas, but you thought you could hide in suburbia.
That was your mistake."
The sirens were getting closer, but Sarah knew the intruders had planned for this contingency. They wouldn't have come here without an exit strategy, and they certainly wouldn't have come without a specific objective.
"What do you want?" she asked directly. "Information. Names, addresses, operational details. Everything you know about the people who were involved in Silent Thunder." Sarah understood now.
These weren't just revenge seekers. They were intelligence gatherers working for someone who wanted to systematically eliminate everyone who had been involved in the operation that had dealt such a significant blow to their network. "I don't have that information anymore," she lied smoothly. "I've been out of the military for 3 years."
"We'll see about that.
You're coming with us, and we're going to have a long conversation about what you remember. The police sirens were very close now, probably less than 2 blocks away. The intruder would have to make a decision soon: cut his losses and run, or try to complete his mission despite the approaching law enforcement.
Sarah made the decision for him.
She moved quickly around the doorframe, her weapon trained on the couch where she had last seen him.
But the space behind it was empty. The man had anticipated her move and relocated while they were talking.
A sound from behind made her spin around. He had circled through her bedroom and was now approaching the kitchen from the opposite direction. Sarah found herself caught in the open living room with limited cover options. They faced each other across the small space, both armed, both trained, both committed to their respective objectives. The man was larger and probably stronger, but Sarah had the advantage of fighting to protect her home and her future with her son. "Drop your weapon," he ordered, his gun pointed at her chest.
"You first," Sarah replied, her own weapon steady despite the adrenaline.
The standoff lasted only seconds, but it felt like hours. Sarah could see the man calculating odds, weighing his chances of completing his mission against the approaching police sirens. She could also see the moment when he decided that taking her alive wasn't worth the risk of capture. His finger began to tighten on the trigger, and Sarah knew she had a split second to act. Her military training had taught her to recognize the micro-expressions that preceded violence, and she had learned to trust those instincts completely. Sarah dove to the side just as the man fired, the bullet passing through the space where she had been standing and embedding itself in the wall behind her. She rolled behind her coffee table and returned fire in one fluid motion. Her shot was true. The second intruder dropped his weapon and staggered backward, clutching his shoulder. He was wounded but not critically, still dangerous if he had a backup weapon. The police sirens were now right outside her building. Sarah could hear car doors slamming and voices shouting commands. The cavalry had finally arrived, but the immediate threat was still in her living room. "Stay down," she ordered the wounded man, keeping her weapon trained on him as she kicked his gun away from his reach. The man glared at her with a mixture of pain and respect. "This isn't over," he said through gritted teeth. "There are others. They know where you live now." Heavy footsteps thundered up the stairs outside her apartment, followed by loud knocking on her damaged doorframe. "Police! Is anyone injured in there?" "In here," Sarah called out. "Situation is under control. I have one wounded suspect in custody." The next few minutes were a blur of activity as police officers flooded into her apartment. Sarah immediately identified herself as a military veteran and explained that she had been defending herself against a home invasion. She placed her weapon on the ground and stepped back with her hands visible, following protocol to avoid any confusion about who was the victim and who were the perpetrators. The wounded intruder was quickly taken into custody and transported to the hospital under police guard. The first man Sarah had shot was pronounced dead at the scene. Sarah felt no guilt about that outcome. He had entered her home with a weapon and hostile intent, and she had defended herself as any trained person would. Detective Maria Santos arrived shortly after the initial response team and took charge of the scene. She was a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude that reminded Sarah of some of her former commanding officers. "Miss Chen," Detective Santos said after reviewing the initial reports. "This is quite a situation. 2 armed intruders, both carrying professional-grade weapons and equipment. This doesn't look like a random home invasion." "No, it wasn't," Sarah agreed. "They knew my name and they knew details about my military service. They were here for a specific purpose." Sarah found herself facing a decision that would change everything. She could continue to try to protect her civilian identity and hope that law enforcement could handle the threat without knowing all the details. Or she could trust Detective Santos with the truth about her background and the enemy she had apparently inherited from her military career. Looking around her apartment, the bullet holes in her walls, the blood on her kitchen floor, the overturned furniture, Sarah realized that her quiet suburban life was over whether she admitted it or not. The people who wanted her dead now knew where she lived, and they would keep coming until they got what they wanted or until she stopped them permanently. Tommy would be getting out of school in a few hours, excited to tell her about the fire station and completely unaware that his mother had spent the morning fighting for their future. Sarah needed to make sure he would be safe, and that meant making some difficult decisions about how much of her past she was willing to reveal. The suburban mom who had started the day folding laundry was gone forever. In her place stood a Navy SEAL who was ready to do whatever was necessary to protect her son and preserve the life they had built together. The war had found her again, but this time she was fighting for something even more important than national security. She was fighting for the right to be a mother. Detective Santos settled into the chair across from Sarah in the small interview room at the police station. The fluorescent lights were harsh, casting everything in sharp relief, but Sarah had sat in rooms like this before during military debriefings. She knew how to compartmentalize, how to stay focused on the essential facts while processing the emotional weight of what had happened. "Miss Chen," Detective Santos began, consulting her notes, "I need to understand what we're dealing with here. The man we have in custody isn't talking, but the weapons and equipment found at your apartment suggest this was a professional operation. What aren't you telling me?" Sarah had spent the last 2 hours wrestling with this decision. She could continue the fiction that she was just an ordinary single mother who had gotten lucky during a home invasion. Or she could trust this detective with the truth and risk exposing herself and Tommy to even greater danger. The turning point had come when she called the preschool to check on Tommy. Hearing his excited voice as he told her about touching a real fire truck helmet had reminded her of exactly what she was fighting for. Her son's innocence, his joy, his right to grow up safe and loved, all of that was worth any risk she might have to take. "My name is Sarah Chen, but that wasn't always my name," she said finally. 3 years ago, I was Petty Officer First Class Sarah Kim, United States Navy SEALs. I was part of a classified operation in Afghanistan that made some very dangerous enemies." Detective Santos raised an eyebrow but didn't interrupt. She had dealt with enough veterans to recognize the signs of someone who had seen real combat. "The operation was successful," Sarah continued, "but the people we targeted have apparently decided that everyone involved needs to pay for what we did. The men who broke into my apartment weren't there to rob me. They wanted information about my former teammates so they could hunt them down too. Why didn't you report this threat when you first became aware of it?" "Because I wasn't aware of it," Sarah said honestly. "I thought I had successfully disappeared into civilian life. I changed my name, moved across the country, got a normal job, enrolled my son in a normal school. I thought the past was behind me." Detective Santos made some notes, then looked up with the expression of someone who was about to deliver bad news. "Miss Chen, or Miss Kim, I need you to understand that this changes everything. If you're being targeted by a terrorist organization with the resources to track you down after 3 years, then you and your son are in immediate danger." Sarah had already reached the same conclusion. "What do you recommend?" "Witness protection, possibly. But that would mean leaving everything behind, your job, your apartment, your life here. Starting completely over with new identities." The thought of uprooting Tommy again, of taking away the stability and friendships he had built at preschool, made Sarah's heart ache. But the thought of him being hurt because she had failed to protect him was infinitely worse. "There might be another option," Detective Santos said carefully. "We could work with federal authorities to set up a sting operation. Use you as bait to draw out whoever is coordinating this effort." Sarah shook her head immediately. "No. I won't risk my son's safety for any operation, no matter how well planned." "What if we could guarantee his safety? Put him somewhere secure while we handle the threat?" Before Sarah could answer, her phone rang. The caller ID showed Tommy's preschool. Sarah's blood ran cold as she answered. "Miss Chen? This is Mrs. Williams from Sunshine Preschool. I'm calling because there was a man here asking questions about Tommy. He said he was a friend of the family, but something didn't feel right about it." Sarah gripped the phone tighter. "What kind of questions?" "He wanted to know what time you usually pick Tommy up, whether you ever sent other people to get him, that sort of thing. When we asked for identification and explained our pickup policies, he left quickly." "But I thought you should know. Where is Tommy now?" Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the panic rising in her chest. "He's safe. He's in the classroom and doesn't know anything about this. But we've implemented our lockdown procedures just to be safe." "I'm on my way," Sarah said. "Don't let anyone except me pick him up, regardless of what identification they show. If there's any doubt at all, call 911. Sarah hung up and turned to Detective Santos. "They found his school. We need to go now." Detective Santos was already reaching for her radio. "I'll coordinate with units in that area. We'll get there as fast as we can." The drive to the preschool felt like the longest 20 minutes of Sarah's life, even though they made it in 12 with police lights and sirens clearing the way. Every instinct she had was screaming that this was a trap, that whoever was behind this had anticipated her protective response and was using Tommy to draw her out. But she also knew that she had no choice. Tommy was everything to her, and she would walk into any trap if it meant keeping him safe. There, Detective Santos pointed to a car parked across the street from the preschool. Dark sedan, tinted windows. Same description as one of the vehicles seen outside your apartment this morning. Sarah studied the car through the police cruiser's bulletproof glass. She couldn't see inside, but every instinct told her there were eyes watching the school's entrance, waiting for her to arrive. "What's the plan?" she asked. "We wait for backup," Detective Santos said. "Then, we surround the vehicle and take whoever's inside into custody." "How long for backup?" 10 minutes, maybe 15. Sarah shook her head. "Too long. Every minute we wait is another minute that Tommy is in potential danger." She was already reaching for the door handle when Detective Santos grabbed her arm. "Ms. Shen, I understand your concern for your son, but running into a potential ambush isn't going to help him. With respect, Detective, I was trained for this kind of situation. I know how to handle myself." "Against how many opponents? In an unknown environment? With civilians around?" Sarah paused. Detective Santos was right about the variables they didn't know. But she was also right about her own capabilities. The suburban mom might hesitate in this situation, but the Navy SEAL knew exactly what needed to be done. "Give me your vest," Sarah said suddenly. "What?" "Your bulletproof vest. Give it to me and create a distraction with the patrol cars. Draw their attention while I approach from the blind side." Detective Santos studied Sarah's face for a long moment. She must have seen something there that convinced her, because she began unstrapping her vest. "This is against every protocol I know," she muttered as she handed it over. "Sometimes protocols have to be adapted to the situation," Sarah replied, adjusting the vest's fit. "I promise I'll be careful." "You better be. I don't want to explain to your son why his mother didn't come home." Sarah slipped out of the patrol car and began making her way around the block, staying out of sight of the sedan while positioning herself to approach from behind. She could see the preschool building from her position, bright and cheerful with children's artwork displayed in the windows. Somewhere inside, Tommy was probably wondering why pickup time was taking so long. The thought of his confusion and possible fear strengthened her resolve. This ended today, one way or another. As she got closer to the sedan, Sarah could see that there were at least 2 people inside. The driver was watching the preschool entrance through binoculars, while the passenger seemed to be monitoring radio communications. Professional surveillance, just like she had expected. Her phone buzzed with a text from Detective Santos, "In position. Creating distraction in 30 seconds." Sarah moved into position behind a parked truck, giving her cover while maintaining a clear view of the sedan. Whatever was about to happen, she needed to be ready to act quickly. The police cars suddenly lit up with lights and sirens, pulling away from the preschool and heading in the opposite direction as if responding to another emergency. The passenger in the sedan immediately began speaking rapidly into his radio, probably reporting the apparent departure of law enforcement. Sarah used the noise and distraction to move closer. She was now less than 20 feet from the sedan, close enough to see that both occupants were armed and clearly experienced in surveillance techniques. Her phone buzzed again. "Can you get a clear view? Need to know numbers and weapons before we move." Sarah typed back quickly, 2 targets, both armed, driver has rifle, passenger has handgun. "Ready when you are." The response came immediately, "Go." Sarah moved swiftly and silently, using skills she hadn't needed in 3 years but which came back as naturally as breathing. She approached the sedan from the rear passenger side, staying in the vehicle's blind spot until she was close enough to act. The passenger window was down slightly to allow for better communication. Sarah reached through the gap and had her weapon pressed against the passenger's neck before either man realized she was there. "Hands where I can see them," she commanded in the same authoritative voice she had used that morning. "Both of you." The driver started to reach for his rifle, but Sarah shifted her aim to include both men. "I wouldn't recommend that. I'm trained to put 2 rounds center mass faster than you can blink."
Both men raised their hands, the passenger's radio crackling with chatter from whoever was coordinating their operation.
Police cars suddenly surrounded the sedan from all directions, and Detective Santos approached with her weapon drawn.
The next few minutes were controlled chaos as both men were taken into custody and their weapons secured.
"Clear," Detective Santos called out, and Sarah finally lowered her weapon. Only then did she look toward the preschool and see Tommy's face pressed against the classroom window, his eyes wide with wonder as he watched the police cars and flashing lights. He had no idea that his mother had just prevented him from being used as leverage in someone else's war.
Mrs. Williams emerged from the building with a look of relief. "Is it safe now?"
"It's safe," Sarah confirmed, though she knew this was only the beginning. There would be more attempts, more people trying to use her son against her. The life they had built here was over, but Tommy's safety was assured for now. As she walked toward the preschool to collect her son, Sarah's phone rang. The number was blocked, but she answered anyway. "Very impressive, Ms. Kim," a voice said. "But this was just a test. We know what you're capable of now, and we'll plan accordingly."
"Who is this?" Sarah demanded. "Someone who has been looking forward to meeting you for a very long time.
Your old commanding officer sends his regards." The line went dead, and Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Her old commanding officer had died in a helicopter crash 6 months after she left the service. If someone was claiming to speak for him, it meant the threat was much more complex and personal than she had realized. But, as Tommy ran toward her with his arms outstretched, chattering excitedly about the police cars and asking if she had seen the fire truck from his field trip, Sarah made a decision that would change everything.
She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't hiding anymore.
Whoever was behind this had made the mistake of threatening her son. Now they were going to learn why the Navy SEALs had trusted her to bring their people home safely from the most dangerous places on Earth. The protective mother and the trained warrior were no longer separate parts of her identity. They had merged into something stronger and more dangerous than either could be alone.
Sarah Chen was done being a target. It was time to become the hunter.
3 days later, Sarah stood in the safe house that Detective Santos had arranged through federal contacts, watching Tommy build an elaborate fortress out of couch cushions. He had adapted to their sudden move with the resilience that children possess, treating it as an adventure rather than understanding the danger that had necessitated it. "Mommy, look," he called out proudly, gesturing to his creation.
"It's a castle where knights protect people."
"It's perfect, sweetheart," Sarah said, managing a smile despite the weight of the decisions she was facing.
"Knights are very important for keeping people safe."
The safe house was a modest suburban home that looked exactly like every other house on the street, which was precisely the point. But Sarah knew that no location could remain secure indefinitely against opponents with the resources and determination to track her down multiple times.
Agent Rebecca Martinez from the FBI's Counterterrorism Division had arrived that morning with both good news and bad news.
The men captured at Sarah's apartment and outside Tommy's school had finally started talking, providing details about the organization that had been hunting members of her former SEAL team. The good news, Agent Martinez had explained during their briefing, is that we now understand the scope of the threat. It's not a massive terrorist organization, it's a smaller group with significant funding and very personal motivations for revenge.
And the bad news?
They've already succeeded in eliminating 2 other members of your team.
We found the bodies yesterday. The news had hit Sarah like a physical blow.
Rodriguez and Thompson, 2 good soldiers who had become good friends, were dead because of an operation they had all participated in together. She had been lucky so far, but luck wasn't a sustainable defense strategy. "There's something else," Agent Martinez had continued.
"We traced the funding for this operation back to its source. The money is coming from someone you know."
Sarah had waited, but she already suspected what she was about to hear.
"Lieutenant Commander James Harrison. Your former commanding officer." "Harrison died in a helicopter crash," Sarah had said immediately.
"I was at his funeral. He survived the crash. Badly injured, but alive. The military reported him dead to protect him while he underwent extensive medical treatment and psychological evaluation.
But something went wrong during his recovery."
He blamed the team from Operation Silent Thunder for his injuries and for the loss of his career. Sarah had felt the world shift around her as she processed this information. Harrison had been more than just her commanding officer, he had been a mentor, someone she had trusted completely. The idea that he was now orchestrating attempts on her life was almost impossible to accept.
He's been planning this for 2 years, Agent Martinez had explained.
Using his intelligence contacts and substantial personal wealth to track down everyone who was involved in the operation.
He believes you all abandoned him when he was injured. Now, watching Tommy play in the safe house, Sarah understood that traditional law enforcement approaches weren't going to solve this problem.
Harrison knew how federal agencies operated because he had worked with them for years. He would always be one step ahead of any official investigation. But there was another approach.
Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, the playground at Riverside Park, midnight tonight.
Come alone, or the boy becomes our primary target. She stared at the message for a long moment, then showed it to Agent Martinez, who had been monitoring communications from her laptop at the kitchen table.
It's a trap, Agent Martinez said immediately. He's trying to draw you out where he can control the environment. Of course it's a trap, Sarah agreed. But it's also an opportunity. We can't authorize you to meet with him. The risk is too great. You're not authorizing anything, Sarah said calmly.
I'm making a decision as a mother who refuses to spend the rest of her son's childhood looking over her shoulder. Agent Martinez studied Sarah's expression and seemed to recognize something there that made her reconsider her objections.
What are you thinking? Harrison trained me.
He knows how I think, how I operate. But I know him too, and he's making decisions based on emotion rather than tactical logic.
That gives me an advantage. You can't take on his entire operation by yourself. I'm not planning to.
I'm planning to end this by removing the person who's coordinating it. Sarah spent the next several hours making preparations that she hoped she would never need to use again. She cleaned and checked her weapons, studied satellite images of Riverside Park, and reviewed everything she knew about Harrison's tactical preferences and psychological profile. At 11 o'clock, after Tommy was safely asleep in the bedroom with Agent Martinez standing guard, Sarah slipped out of the safe house through the back door. She had disabled the monitoring equipment that was supposed to track her movements, another skill from her military days that proved unexpectedly useful. Riverside Park was 15 minutes away by car, but Sarah arrived an hour early to conduct reconnaissance and establish her own tactical advantage. The park was exactly what she had expected: multiple entry and exit points, plenty of cover, and numerous positions where Harrison could station backup personnel. But Sarah had trained in environments like this hundreds of times. She knew how to use darkness and terrain to her advantage, and she knew how Harrison thought about tactical positioning. At exactly midnight, she approached the playground from the direction Harrison would least expect. Her former commanding officer was already there, seated on a bench near the swing set, looking exactly like what he was, a man who had been through hell and emerged with his mind broken in dangerous ways. "Hello, Sarah," he said without turning around. "I was beginning to wonder if you would actually show up." "Hello, Commander," she replied, using his old rank out of habit. "Though I understand you're officially dead now." Harrison laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Dead to the Navy, yes. But very much alive and very motivated to settle some old scores. Rodriguez and Thompson are dead because of you." "Rodriguez and Thompson are dead because they left me behind," Harrison said, his voice hardening. "Just like the rest of you did." Sarah moved carefully around the playground equipment, keeping cover between herself and Harrison while trying to locate any backup personnel he might have positioned in the area. "We didn't leave you behind," she said. "The helicopter crash happened 3 days after we returned from the mission. None of us even knew you were injured until we were told you had died." "Convenient story," Harrison replied. "But I know the truth. I know that you all could have prevented what happened to me if you had been willing to speak up about the intelligence failures during that operation." Sarah began to understand the depth of his delusion. Harrison had convinced himself that his injuries were somehow connected to Operation Silent Thunder, when in reality they had been the result of a completely separate incident that occurred days later. "Commander, you need help. Professional help. This isn't who you used to be." "This is exactly who I used to be," Harrison said, finally, turning to face her. "I'm a soldier who completes his missions, no matter what the cost." Sarah could see that reasoning with him wasn't going to be possible. His mind had created a narrative that justified his actions, and no amount of logic or truth was going to penetrate that delusion.
What do you want? She asked directly. I want you to pay for what you did. All of you. And, my son? What did a 4-year-old boy ever do to deserve being threatened? Children are always casualties in war, Harrison said coldly. You should have thought about that before you betrayed your commanding officer. At that moment, Sarah realized that the man she had once respected and trusted was completely gone, replaced by someone who was willing to hurt innocent children to satisfy his desire for revenge. The conversation was over. Sarah moved quickly, using the playground equipment as cover while she advanced on Harrison's position. Her former commanding officer was skilled and experienced, but he was also operating from a fixed position and had made the mistake of assuming she would approach this confrontation like a negotiation rather than a combat operation. Harrison drew his weapon as soon as he realized she was moving, but Sarah had anticipated this response. She rolled behind the slide structure just as his first shot rang out, the bullet striking metal where she had been standing a moment before. You always were the best of my students, Harrison called out. But I'm the one who taught you everything you know. You taught me tactics, Sarah replied, moving to a new position while she spoke. But you didn't teach me what I was fighting for. She could hear Harrison repositioning himself, trying to gain a better angle of attack. But Sarah had already identified the weakness in his strategy. He was thinking like a military commander planning an operation, not like a mother protecting her child. The difference was that Sarah was willing to take risks that a professional soldier wouldn't take, because the stakes were personal rather than strategic. She wasn't trying to win a battle, she was trying to ensure that Tommy would never have to be afraid again. Sarah emerged from cover with her weapon trained on Harrison's center mass. He had anticipated her movement and was ready for her, but he had underestimated her speed and determination. It's over, Commander, she said, her voice carrying absolute authority. No, Harrison replied, his own weapon aimed at her. It's just beginning. For a moment, they faced each other across the playground where children came to laugh and play during the day, two trained killers whose lives had brought them to this impossible confrontation. Sarah thought of Tommy sleeping safely in the safe house, trusting that his mother would handle whatever needed to be handled. You have a choice, Sarah said. Stand down, get the help you need, and let this end here. Or force me to do something that will hurt us both. The only thing that will end this is your death, Harrison replied. Sarah saw his finger begin to tighten on the trigger and knew that the conversation portion of this encounter was over. Her military training took complete control, and she responded with the lethal efficiency that had made her one of the Navy's most trusted special operations soldiers. The sound of gunfire echoed across the empty park twice in rapid succession. When it was over, Lieutenant Commander James Harrison lay motionless on the playground where children would return to play the next morning, completely unaware of what had happened in their sanctuary. Sarah stood over her former commanding officer's body for a long moment, feeling a mixture of grief and relief that she knew would take time to process completely. The man who had taught her how to be a warrior was dead by her hand, but the threat to her son's future was over. She called Agent Martinez to report what had happened, then sat on the swing set to wait for the authorities to arrive. In a few hours, she would return to the safe house where Tommy would wake up and want breakfast and stories about his dreams from the night before. The suburban mom and the Navy SEAL had finally become one person, someone who could fold laundry and plan birthday parties, but who could also do whatever was necessary to protect the people she loved most. Sarah Chen had learned that you could leave the military, but the warrior's heart never really went away. It just found new and more important battles to fight. 6 months later, Sarah and Tommy moved to a new city and started fresh with their real names and a clean slate. Tommy started kindergarten and made friends quickly, while Sarah found work as a security consultant for companies that needed someone who truly understood how to assess and counter serious threats. Sometimes, late at night after Tommy was asleep, Sarah would think about the choices she had made and the prices she had paid for their safety. But when she watched her son playing happily with his friends, completely innocent of the dangers that had once threatened their simple life together, she knew that every difficult decision had been worth it. The quiet life she had wanted was finally possible, not because she had hidden from her past, but because she had faced it directly and emerged victorious. Sarah Chen was no longer running from who she used to be. She had learned how to be both the mother Tommy needed and the protector he deserved, and that was more than enough.